Hey guys, tonight we're pulling back the curtain on a side of samurai life no one ever talks about. The part that begins when the swords are sheathed and the armour comes off. You'd think these warriors, painted as calm masters of Zen, ended their days in quiet meditation. Instead, their nights were battles of their own. So before you get cozy, I'd really appreciate a quick like or even a subscribe. It helps way more than you know. And hey, I'm always curious where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment with your city and what time it is for you. Now lay back, close your eyes, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your bed is a tatami mat, a woven reed rectangle that looks elegant in movies, but in reality is about as comfortable as lying on a picnic basket left in the rain. It smells faintly of mould, straw, and candle soot. You sink onto it and immediately feel the first bite. The mat is crawling with fleas, lice, and whatever other insects have decided your body heat is an all-you-can-eat buffet. There are no sheets, no pillows, just you and the straw. It's not relaxation, it's survival training with splinters, and that's before the hair wax starts working its magic. Samurai kept their famous top knots glued in place with binsuke abura, a thick mix of sesame oil and animal fat. During the day, it looked sharp under the helmet. At night, it melted. You press your head down and your cheek sticks to the mat like you've face-planted into a frying pan. The smell, part sesame, part barnyard, is so strong it could be bottled as a natural bug repellent, though sadly it doesn't repel the bugs crawling on you now. Hungry? Too bad. Many samurai practice fasting before bed, a mix of ritual discipline and the very real possibility that food was scarce. You try to sleep while your stomach growls loud enough to sound like an intruder sneaking through the paper walls. Supposedly this hunger sharpened the mind. Realistically, it just meant you were lying awake imagining rice balls instead of getting rest. And then there's the fear. Samurai didn't sleep the way you do, sprawled out dreaming of Netflix. They slept rigid, weapons at their side, trained to wake at the faintest sound of a sliding door. Some even practiced sleeping in positions that allowed them to rise and strike in one motion. Imagine military drills at midnight, except your pyjamas are a sweat-soaked underrobe, and your alarm clock might be an assassin. The room doesn't help either. A smoky candle flickers, filling the chamber with haze that burns your throat and stings your eyes. The flame feels like safety, but the soot turns your bedroom into a slow-motion chimney. You cough, but quietly, because noise might mean weakness, and weakness is the last thing you can afford. This is the part of samurai life no one paints scrolls about. The parasites, the grease, the gnawing hunger, the constant paranoia. The bedtime routine of a warrior wasn't peaceful Zen meditation. It was itchy, smoky, restless endurance. Proof that even the fiercest fighters still had to wrestle with bad sleep hygiene. And as you shift on the sticky mat, scratching at bites and waiting for your candle to finally sputter out, you realise that the true test of samurai discipline wasn't on the battlefield. It was trying to survive the night without losing your mind. But if you think nighttime was miserable, wait until morning, when discipline started all over again before the sun even rose. You would think that after a long day of training, a samurai would at least get to undress and collapse into something soft and forgiving. Instead, your nightwear is nothing more than a cotton or hemp underrobe that clings like wet paper and never sees a proper wash. These robes, known as kasode, doubled as daytime wear and nighttime wear, which is a polite way of saying you're sleeping in clothes that have soaked up the entire day's worth of sweat, smoke, and battlefield dust. It is less pyjama and more portable grime collection. The fabric is stiff, rough, and often oily from the constant hair wax. You lie there swaddled in something that feels less like clothing and more like an ancient dish rag. Even worse, the robe is not necessarily removed before crawling under the straw mat. Samurai often slept fully clothed to be ready for sudden attacks. The idea of pyjamas as a separate comfort item did not exist. You sleep dressed for disaster, every fold of your kasode pressed into your skin, itchy and damp with body heat. This was not cultural oversight, it was practicality. In a world where night raids were not rare, Stripping down for comfort was essentially inviting death to visit while you were at your most exposed. Samurai discipline demanded that you be halfway to the battlefield even while unconscious. There is also the matter of the armour. It sounds absurd to modern ears, but some warriors slept in partial armour, especially when on campaign or while stationed in enemy territory. Imagine trying to nod off with iron plates pressing into your ribs, leather straps biting your shoulders, and the faint smell of rust mixing with the candle smoke in the room. The average samurai considered this a sensible precaution. To you, it feels like trying to nap inside a toolbox. This lack of proper restwear had consequences. Chafing was inevitable. Sores built up where straps rubbed against the body, and lice thrived in unwashed clothing. In fact, samurai culture accepted lice as a constant presence. There are accounts of warriors casually picking them out of their sleeves during meetings, as if they were dealing with nothing more serious than crumbs from a meal. Bedtime, therefore, became an extension of daytime, another phase of endurance rather than relaxation. A warrior's garments clung to him day and night, breeding discomfort and reinforcing the identity of constant vigilance. The absurdity here is easy to miss. You picture warriors as disciplined ascetics, calmly meditating under moonlight. The reality is closer to you lying in a stiff cloth that reeks of sweat and grease, swatting at insects and praying that the strap digging into your shoulder does not develop into a festering sore. Sleep became yet another battlefield, and your opponent was your own uniform. You try shifting on your tatami mat, but the robe twists tighter around your body, trapping the heat. The room is warm, the candle sputters, and your wax topknot sticks to the fabric at the back of your neck like glue. If you do drift off, you wake periodically from the sharp bite of an insect or the scrape of your own armour. The whole arrangement is a reminder that your body does not belong to you. It belongs to discipline, to ritual, to constant readiness for combat. Comfort was never a priority, survival was. Nightwear also reflected status. Wealthier samurai could afford silk cassode, which at least breathed better than hemp. But silk did not solve the larger problems. It absorbed sweat just as thoroughly, it rarely got washed, and it often came alive with insects. Imagine sweating into a silk pillowcase for weeks, and then wearing it against your skin every night. That is luxury, but only by the low standards of the period. The Japanese climate made matters worse. Summers were humid and brutal, with heat sticking to every surface and insects multiplying with enthusiasm. In winter, nights were freezing, the thin robes trapping cold against the skin. Without central heating or insulation, sleeping arrangements varied between clammy discomfort and bone-chilling misery. Fires inside sleeping quarters were limited because of the risk of fire in wooden homes. So many samurai relied on body heat alone. Even elite warriors went to bed shivering, teeth rattling, wrapped in stiff blankets that smelled of smoke and mildew. The symbolism of sleeping dressed was also cultural. Samurai believed in preparedness, and the image of a warrior stripped naked in bed was unthinkable. Clothing represented more than fabric, it was part of identity and readiness. Sleeping unclothed was not only impractical, it was dishonourable. So the itchy cassode stayed on, the strap stayed tied, and your night was spent wrapped in the same damp layers that you had worn during training or battle. The idea of comfort-based sleep is modern. The samurai approach to bedtime was shaped entirely by duty and survival. Your body was treated as another tool of war, and tools were not meant to rest luxuriously. They were meant to endure. The result was a culture where even in sleep, the warrior remained half awake, always at attention, never fully surrendered to rest. And as you shift again, sweat sticking your robe to your skin, the air heavy with wax and smoke, you realize that rest is a luxury the samurai never truly allowed themselves. Even when lying down, they were rehearsing the next fight. But your clothing was only part of the misery. The rituals surrounding sleep went far beyond itchy robes and greasy mats. Some of the most disturbing routines involved what you could and could not eat before bed, and the strange beliefs that govern digestion and discipline. Your clothing clings to you as you settle on the mat, but it is not only fabric and wax that weigh you down, it is also the empty rumble of your stomach. samurai culture did not encourage late-night indulgence. In fact, one of the strangest parts of bedtime was the uneasy relationship between food, discipline, and superstition. Meals were tied tightly to codes of conduct, spiritual beliefs, and the demands of war. This meant that when you were finally allowed to lie down, your stomach was rarely satisfied. Dinner, if you even had one, was small and plain. Most samurai meals centered around rice, miso soup, and pickled vegetables. Protein came in modest amounts, often from fish or tofu, but rarely in the quantities you imagine from stories of mighty warriors. Even meat was far less common than legend suggests, since Buddhist teachings had shaped Japanese diets for centuries. Many households avoided animal flesh altogether. Eating heavily before bed was considered indulgent, even dangerous. Samurai were expected to maintain restraint, and this included how they ended their day. The philosophy behind this restraint was twofold. On a practical level, overeating before sleep was thought to weaken the body and dull the senses. A bloated stomach could make a warrior sluggish and unready for battle should danger arrive at night. On a spiritual level, gluttony was seen as dishonourable. Food was fuel, not pleasure. Falling asleep after a feast was indulgence suited to courtiers, not hardened fighters. So, you went to bed hungry more often than not, a growling reminder that self-control was the true meal of a warrior. There were also deeply held beliefs about digestion. Traditional Japanese medicine placed great importance on the timing of meals. It was believed that eating too close to bedtime trapped impurities in the body, disrupting not only physical health but also spiritual balance. Illnesses from indigestion to nightmares were blamed on late suppers. As you lie down, your stomach twists not only with hunger, but with the knowledge that even if you had eaten more, you would have been told you were poisoning yourself. Sleep was supposed to be a time of purification, not indulgence, and food before rest was thought to corrupt the process. The result was that bedtime often became a nightly fast, a deliberate act of endurance. Some warriors even formalized this into ritual. Records describe men refusing meals after sunset as part of their training, deliberately courting hunger to strengthen their will. Imagine being told that falling asleep with your stomach gnawing at itself was not only normal, but an act of virtue. It was not just a personal choice either, it was cultural expectation. To sleep lightly and wake quickly was the mark of discipline. Hunger was simply another weapon in the samurai arsenal. Of course, hunger has physical consequences. Malnutrition over time could weaken the immune system, thin the body, and make deep rest elusive. Samurai training often demanded strength and stamina, yet the very ritual surrounding food could chip away at health. In lean times, particularly during war campaigns, bedtime hunger was not just symbolic, but brutally real. Supplies were rationed, rice was stretched thin, and nights were endured with empty bellies. Food scarcity became part of the routine, so the body learned to associate sleep not with restoration, but with deprivation. And the absurd part is that hunger was paired with an obsession for ritual tea. Samurai households often drank green tea at night, both as a stimulant to remain alert and as a supposed aid to digestion. Tea culture in Japan became deeply tied to warrior identity. By the 16th century, tea ceremonies were not only social events but acts of discipline, emphasizing order and focus. Drinking tea before bed kept the senses sharp but also made sleep harder, leaving you in that half-restless state of wired exhaustion. You lie awake, belly empty, mind buzzing from bitter tea, rehearsing sword forms in your head instead of drifting into dreams. Food before bed also became a weapon of social control. Retainers and lower-ranked warriors were given smaller rations, especially at night, as a reminder of hierarchy. The lord might enjoy a bowl of rice and grilled fish before retiring, but his retainers had to settle for half portions of pickles and miso. Going to bed hungry reinforced obedience. Hunger was not just personal suffering, it was political. The samurai class learned to tie loyalty with deprivation, their very stomachs bending to the demands of duty. You can almost hear the logic forming as you turn on your mat, stomach gurgling like a distant drum. To the samurai, food was never only food. It was morality, strength and discipline wrapped into every grain of rice. Skipping supper became as much a badge of honor as wearing armor. This was the cruel irony of their bedtime routine. They could swing swords with grace and march for days, yet their nights were spent wrestling not with enemies, but with their own stomachs. The cultural weight of this fasting practice lingered for centuries. Manuals from the Edo period continued to warn against late meals, insisting that warriors should remain lean and alert even while resting. And while you roll on your straw mat, trying to quiet the hollow ache in your belly, you realise that this philosophy was not only uncomfortable, it was unsustainable. A body cannot thrive without nourishment, yet the culture demanded that warriors treat hunger as if it were training itself. You pull the blanket tighter against the cold and listen to the hollow grumble of your own gut. Sleep does not come easily, but that was the point. For the samurai, the night was not a retreat into comfort. It was another drill, another exercise in endurance. Even hunger was weaponized, turned into a nightly ritual of discipline. And as the candle sputters low, the room heavy with smoke and the faint smell of pickled vegetables lingering from the evening, you understand that rest was never restful here. It was controlled deprivation, a lesson in sacrifice carved into the body itself. But food and fasting were not the only rituals to shape the night. Sleep for a samurai was also haunted by constant fears of attack, and the bizarre strategies they used to prepare for sudden violence at midnight revealed just how far they were willing to twist rest into another form of battle. Your stomach growls as you shift on the mat, but hunger is not the only thing keeping your eyes open. Sleep for a samurai was never only about rest, it was about survival. The night was never safe, and the very idea of lying defenseless was unthinkable. You're expected to sleep like a coiled spring, ready to snap awake at the faintest whisper of danger. That constant fear of attack turned bedtime into an exercise in paranoia. Raids in the night were a very real possibility, especially during the Sengoku period, the so-called Warring States era when rival clans clashed for power. Walls of paper and wood offered little protection against an enemy with fire or blades. Samurai homes were designed with sliding screens, open courtyards, and thin walls that looked elegant but made invasion alarmingly easy. You lie down knowing that if someone wants to kill you in the dark, they will not have to try very hard. Your defense is not in the architecture. It is in your readiness. Weapons are placed beside you with deliberate care. The katana might rest within arm's reach, along with the shorter wakizashi. For some, the blades were kept unsheathed, balanced carefully for a quick strike. Sleeping with weapons was not symbolic, it was practical. The warrior was expected to spring from the mat in one smooth movement, blade in hand before fully conscious. Training drilled this into habit. Even in sleep, the body was prepared to fight. Your version of reaching for the snooze button is instead reaching for steel, but this readiness was not simply habit. It was culture. Samurai codes emphasized vigilance. Falling asleep too deeply was a flaw, not a luxury. The warrior was meant to remain alert even in dreams, the paradox of rest without true surrender. Historical accounts describe men sleeping in carefully chosen positions, backs angled for quick rise, heads turned toward the door. The body itself became a kind of alarm system. Your ears strain for footsteps in the dark, your muscles never fully relax, and sleep becomes a thin layer of consciousness rather than an escape. The irony is that this constant alertness only made life harder. Without deep rest, the body weakens. Lack of sleep impairs reflexes, clouds judgment, and erodes stamina. But the fear of vulnerability outweighed the need for recovery. Warriors convinced themselves that light, restless sleep was a sign of discipline. The truth was, it was often a sign of exhaustion. Imagine training all day in armor, fasting through the evening, and then lying down only to stay half awake waiting for someone to murder you. It is less noble tradition, and more self-inflicted torment. Night attacks were a genuine strategy in warfare. Armies would set fires to enemy camps, forcing men to wake in chaos, scrambling for weapons. Samurai castles and fortresses often prepared for such tactics by establishing night watches, yet paranoia seeped into households as well. Even in supposed peace, a rival could send an assassin. To lie in bed was to gamble with fate. Your candle flickers against the paper screen, throwing shadows that could be enemies or could be nothing at all. Either way, you do not sleep soundly. The methods to cope with this fear were bizarre. Some warriors relied on charms and talismans, small paper slips inscribed with Buddhist sutras, placed under pillows or at the entrance of rooms. Others muttered prayers before lying down, invoking protection against unseen enemies. Superstition and steel worked hand in hand, each trying to defend the vulnerable state of rest. To modern eyes, it seems absurd to combine chanting with clutching a sword, but in the world of the samurai, both were logical shields against the dark. Fires were another source of dread. Samurai houses were built of wood, paper and bamboo, materials that ignited with ease. Night raids often used flames as the first strike. A torch tossed onto a roof could send families fleeing before they ever drew a blade. As you close your eyes, the scent of candle wax is a reminder not of warmth, but of risk. Every flicker of firelight could be the beginning of disaster. This meant warriors did not only fear men with swords, but the very element that lit their rooms. Sleep meant lying beside potential destruction. There was also the matter of noise. In cities like Kyoto, nighttime was never silent. Thieves, drunkards, and rival gangs prowled alleys. Samurai households often kept dogs to bark at intruders, but the barking itself became part of the unrest. Every sound of creaking wood or shifting wind could be a warning. You're never sure whether the noise outside is a cat or a killer. Either way, you remain tense, half awake, eyes open in the dark. The paranoia extended into sleeping arrangements themselves. Higher-ranked samurai sometimes placed retainers or guards near their rooms, turning bedtime into a miniature garrison. Even within a household, trust was conditional. History is filled with betrayals between vassals and lords, often carried out in the secrecy of night. A warrior could be murdered in the very bed where he rehearsed vigilance. This made loyalty as fragile as rest. You lie down among your own men, and still, you wonder if they will be the ones to end you before morning. The weight of this culture is astonishing. Samurai, who are remembered for poise and composure, lived in constant dread when the lights went out. The very people who meditated on impermanence and discipline were also people who flinched at shadows on the wall, who clutched blades as they tried to sleep, who never trusted a locked door to keep danger at bay. Their reality was not tranquility. It was nightly rehearsals for death. And as you lie there now, the katana balanced within arm's reach, stomach hollow, body sore, you realize the ritual has shaped you into a figure of endless tension. Sleep is no longer an escape, it is another battlefield, fought with paranoia, talismans, and thin blankets of straw. The night stretches on, and rest remains an illusion. Yet paranoia was only one piece of the puzzle. The atmosphere of samurai sleep was also shaped by the very rooms they occupied. From smoky air to cramped quarters, the environment itself was a hazard, turning each night into an endurance test of body and lungs. The candlelight flickers beside you, its glow soft against the paper screen, but the air grows heavier with every breath. Samurai sleeping quarters were not sanctuaries of calm, they were traps of smoke, soot, and suffocating design. The room itself was as much an enemy as any assassin. The construction of traditional homes relied on wood, bamboo and washi paper, materials elegant in appearance but impractical for comfort. As you lie in the dim haze, you're inhaling centuries of architectural choice that valued form over survival. The problem begins with fire. Illumination came from oil lamps or tallow candles, both of which produced thick smoke. Unlike the clean-burning fuels of modern lamps, these sources left soot that clung to walls and lungs alike. Samurai houses lacked chimneys, relying instead on open ventilation that was often closed at night to keep out intruders or cold. The result was a bedroom filled with stale air, smoke curling into your nose and throat, leaving you coughing quietly into your sleeve. This was not poor planning. It was standard practice. To sleep in samurai Japan was to choke politely while pretending the haze did not exist. Beyond the smoke was the constant smell of humanity. Rooms were small, sometimes shared with family, retainers or guards. Privacy as you understand it did not exist. You slept surrounded by others, breathing in the same stagnant air. In winter, this closeness offered warmth, but it also meant stewing in a mixture of sweat, wax, and the earthy scent of unwashed bodies. Even elite warriors who could afford separate quarters rarely escaped the problem. Thin walls of paper did little to block noise or smell, turning every cough, shuffle, or mutter into part of your nightly environment. The design of samurai homes made this worse. Tatami mats absorbed everything. Sweat seeped into their straw cores. Food particles fell into their seams. Insects nested within. Over time, mats reeked of mildew, grease, and decay. Lying on one was like pressing your face into a compost heap, delicately disguised as flooring. Replacing mats was expensive, so most were used until they became breeding grounds for vermin. You lie down not on bedding, but on a colony of smells and creatures that grow more lively as the night deepens. Temperature was another punishment. In the humid summers, air pooled heavy inside the wooden walls, trapping heat like an oven. Mosquitoes descended in swarms, buzzing at ears, biting exposed flesh, turning sleep into a slow torture. In the winters, the same thin walls let in freezing winds, and the mats became icy slabs. Samurai used thick quilts called futon, but these quickly became damp with condensation and mildew. Nights swung between sweating and shivering, the body never able to settle. To endure this was not considered hardship, but simply part of the discipline of warrior life. And then there was noise. Japanese towns and castles were not silent places. Dogs barked through the night. Roosters crowed at odd hours. Drunks stumbled home from taverns, and thieves prowled the alleys. Even within the walls of a samurai estate, guards shuffled, armor clinked, and watchmen called out at intervals. Paper walls blocked none of it. Every whisper and groan seeped through, reminding you that night was never private. Sleep became an act of willpower against the soundtrack of human existence. One overlooked misery was insects. Fleas and lice thrived in bedding, but mosquitoes ruled the summers. Without glass windows or proper screens, every opening in a house became an invitation for pests. Fires were sometimes lit to produce smoke as a repellent, which meant choosing between bites or suffocation. Samurai endured this as stoically as they could, but records note the annoyance of insects as a constant plague. Even elite households could not buy immunity. You lie awake scratching, trying to choose whether it is worse to be eaten alive or choked by smoke. Hygiene only deepened the absurdity. While bathing in hot springs and tubs was part of Japanese culture, daily washing was not always possible, especially during campaigns. Sweat-soaked clothing and greasy waxed hair mingled with the stagnant air of a sealed room. Blankets were rarely washed, mats almost never, and the scent of human occupation layered year after year. In a culture obsessed with ritual cleanliness, the irony was that sleeping quarters became some of the filthiest spaces of daily life. And yet, the samurai endured this without complaint. In fact, endurance was the point. Discomfort reinforced discipline. To suffer nightly was proof of strength. To rest easily would be indulgence. The smoky air, the cramped quarters, the vermin, the endless noise, all of it became part of the training. A warrior was expected to sleep lightly, breathe shallowly, and wake ready for violence. Even the environment conspired to mold the body into a tool of war. As you cough against the haze, your skin itching against the straw, your ears twitching at footsteps beyond the paper wall, you realize that rest here is not recovery. It is surveillance. It is a half-sleep performed in an environment that actively undermines the body. Every night was a reminder that comfort was weakness, that even the bedroom was another battlefield. But there was still another layer to this misery. The rituals of grooming and the obsession with hair care did not pause when the lights went out. In fact, the wax topknot became one of the most grotesque elements of samurai bedtime, turning pillows and mats into sticky traps of grease and grime. The air is thick and your bedding reeks, but now you become aware of the stickiness creeping along your scalp. The samurai obsession with hair was more than vanity, it was identity, and that identity came at a steep price when it was time to sleep. The topknot, carefully sculpted during the day, did not simply vanish when the armour came off. It remained caked in wax and oil, flattening against the mat, smearing itself into the very place where your head tried to rest. The nightly struggle was not just against insects and smoke, but against your own hair, which had been transformed into a greasy monument to warrior pride. The wax itself, known as Binsuke Bura, was originally created for sumo wrestlers and later adopted by samurai to stiffen their hair into its iconic knot. The mixture included sesame oil, rapeseed oil, and animal fat, thickened into a substance that hardened with time and body heat. Applied generously, it could hold hair in a rigid place for hours under a helmet. The problem, of course, was what happened after the helmet came off. The wax did not disappear, it melted. As you press your head against the mat, the warm oils seep outward, leaving stains on the straw and glue-like patches that trap lice with the efficiency of flypaper. This ritual of grooming was central to warrior culture. A properly tied and waxed topknot symbolized status, discipline, and readiness. To appear with hair loose or unkempt was dishonorable, a visible mark of laziness. Even in death, hair mattered. Samurai who committed seppuku would arrange their hair neatly before the act, ensuring that even in the final moment their appearance aligned with tradition. This obsession carried into the night, when waxed knots became inescapable burdens. You could not simply wash it out, both because soap was scarce and because hair was meant to remain fixed for days. Bedtime, therefore, became a process of lying perfectly still, trying not to smear your identity across the bedding. Hygiene made this worse. Baths were important in Japanese culture, but regular hair washing was not practical. Water was not always hot, and oils were difficult to remove without strong cleansers. As a result, samurai hair grew dense with layers of wax, dust and sweat, building up like armour of its own. Insects thrived in the oily environment, feeding on the scalp and nesting in mats of hair. You lie scratching, aware that beneath your proud knot is a colony of unwelcome companions. The very symbol of your honour has turned into a private ecosystem, squirming and biting as you try to rest. The pillows designed to accommodate the knot only added insult to injury. Instead of soft cushions, samurai often used small wooden or lacquered headrests, known as makura, that kept the knot elevated and intact. These were more like props than pillows, designed not for comfort but for preservation of appearance. Resting on one meant craning your neck at odd angles, balancing your head like a delicate ornament. Rolling over crushed the knot and risked dishonour in the morning. So you trained yourself to sleep still, perched on a wooden block, your neck stiff and your scalp itching. It was less bedtime and more a balancing act. The absurdity becomes clear when you consider the consequences. A warrior spent his days swinging weapons, marching in armour, enduring heat and hunger, yet his night was compromised by vanity. The wax that marked him as disciplined also glued him to his mat. The pillow that preserved his status sabotaged his rest. Even in the privacy of sleep, the samurai could not escape performance. His body was a stage, his hair a costume, and the audience was tradition itself. The long-term effects of this grooming were not benign. Chronic scalp irritation, hair loss, and lice infestations were common. Historical records describe the prevalence of shaved patches and sores beneath helmets, the result of wax build-up and trapped sweat. The scalp became another battlefield, scarred not by swords but by ritual. What was meant to project strength often bred weakness, leaving warriors perpetually uncomfortable and sometimes diseased. You can almost smell it now. the mix of oils gone rancid, the sweet-sour odour of sweat mingling with animal fat. Each shift of your head smears more of it into the mat, darkening the straw with permanent stains. By morning the pillow is slick, the blanket carries the smell, and your hair remains rigid in place, as if mocking you for thinking you might rest. And yet, this was celebrated. To endure discomfort for the sake of appearance was not seen as absurd, but as virtuous. The samurai embodied discipline through every detail, down to the strands of hair cemented to his scalp. Sleep was never a private surrender. It was another opportunity to prove devotion to ritual. If you woke groggy, neck stiff, and scalp crawling, so much the better. It meant you had endured, and endurance was the highest proof of worth. The candle gutters, and the air grows colder, but your head remains trapped against the sticky mat. Even in the dark, you feel the knot pulling at your scalp, the oils congealing like armour you cannot remove. The symbol of your class, your discipline, your very honour has made your bed a prison. The top knot may be glorious in the light of day, but in the silence of night, it is nothing more than a greasy torment. And as your eyelids finally grow heavy, your head still balanced on the hard edge of the makura, you realise that even rest has been claimed by ritual. The wax is inescapable, the discomfort eternal. Your bed is not a place of sleep, it is a monument to suffering disguised as tradition. Yet grooming was only one aspect of the ordeal. The culture of the samurai turned even the act of where and how one slept into a lesson in hierarchy, with strict codes determining who lay where and in what order. Rank did not disappear at night. It followed you into the very arrangement of mats and blankets. The wax sticks to your scalp and the wooden pillow digs into your neck, but there is still no freedom in rest. Even in sleep, hierarchy dictates your place. Samurai society was built on rank, and that rank did not fade when the candles were blown out. Bedtime was another theatre where order had to be preserved. Where you slept, who you slept beside, and even the angle of your body could reveal loyalty, honour, or betrayal. The room itself became a map of status. At the centre of this arrangement was the lord, the daimyo, or the household head. He lay in the most secure position, often furthest from the entrance, protected by walls or screens. This was not just comfort, it was strategy. Intruders would have to pass through layers of retainers to reach him. His bedding was thicker, his quilt heavier, and his privacy marginally greater, though even he could not escape the haze of wax, smoke, and insects. Around him, retainers arranged themselves like layers of armour, each ranked by proximity. To be closer to the Lord was an honour. To be pushed to the outer edges was a silent demotion. This structure extended even into the field. In war camps, the positioning of tents followed strict codes, with generals in the rear, protected by soldiers at the perimeter. A warrior's sleep was not simply a personal need, it was part of the larger defensive system. At home or in camp, your body was a pawn on a chessboard, placed for strategic utility even when unconscious. Your mat was not yours, it was an assignment. The absurdity of this becomes clear when you imagine the daily grind. After hours of training or combat, you might long to collapse wherever you wished. Instead, you had to file into position like pieces in a puzzle, knowing that being shifted even a few feet could reflect your current standing in the eyes of your lord. Bedtime was a living chart of loyalty and rank. Every night reinforced the order of society, as visible in the layout of sleeping bodies as in the battlefield itself. For lower-ranked retainers, this often meant sleeping nearest the doors or along the drafty edges of the room. You became the human shield, the first to face danger should intruders arrive. These positions were cold, uncomfortable, and often infested with vermin, since mats at the edges absorbed dampness from the walls. Yet this was part of your duty. To serve meant to lie down where told, to freeze in winter and swelter in summer, to itch through the night while your betters rested more comfortably within. The loyalty of a samurai was not just proven with sword or oath, but with the silent acceptance of a miserable place to sleep. Even within families, Order was enforced. Fathers occupied central spots, sons flanked them, wives and children arranged around. Servants clustered at the edges, close enough to answer commands but far enough to remain clearly subordinate. Privacy did not exist, but hierarchy did. In every breath, snore and shift of bodies on mats, social rank was written into the very geometry of the room. The discipline extended beyond households. Samurai castles, such as those constructed during the late medieval period, often included barrack-style sleeping halls for retainers. These resembled military dormitories, with men lying side by side in strict formation. The structure was practical for space, but also ideological. By removing individuality, the sleeping hall reinforced unity and subordination. A man did not have a personal bed. He had a position, interchangeable and temporary, dictated by the needs of his lord. You did not rest as yourself. You rested as a function of the system. The consequences of this arrangement were more than symbolic. Being pushed to an outer position often meant exposure to the worst drafts and dampness. Illness could spread quickly in close quarters, and those on the fringes became sick first. But illness was also political. A warrior weakened by fever or cough could easily be replaced, his diminished position mirrored in the placement of his mat. To fall ill was not only a personal setback, but a visible demotion in the nightly diagram of power. Noise amplified the misery. Packed tightly together, men snored, coughed, and shifted. Their bodies a constant reminder that you were never alone. The paper walls carried the sounds of the night beyond, but the real chorus was inside the room, where every sleeper became part of a symphony of wheezes and scratches. You could not shift without brushing another body, could not cough without being heard, could not roll without disrupting the fragile order of the human formation. What seems today like punishment was framed as discipline. Sleeping by rank taught warriors to see themselves as part of a hierarchy that extended beyond the battlefield. It normalized obedience, reinforced loyalty, and reminded every man of his place. Even dreams were subordinated to structure. To sleep out of position would be unthinkable, a mark of rebellion that could stain reputation. The very act of closing your eyes was shaped by duty. The irony is that this arrangement often made rest impossible. Packed together in smoky rooms, bodies lined in careful order, lice crawling from one mat to another, men lay awake not only from discomfort, but from awareness of their place in the pecking order. A warrior's pride or shame was measured by the few feet between his body and his lord's. Even in unconsciousness, the hierarchy pressed down like a weight. And as you lie there now, squeezed into your assigned corner, the cold seeping up from the mat and the whispers of retainers filling the dark, you feel how deeply order has invaded the very heart of rest. You're not just lying on straw. You're lying within the invisible structure of rank, pinned to your place by loyalty and fear. Yet hierarchy was not the only weight that shaped the samurai knight. The very beliefs that guided their souls, their superstitions and rituals of protection, crept into the bedroom too. Bedtime was not only a matter of rank and wax and smoke. It was also a spiritual battlefield haunted by charms, prayers, and the invisible dangers of the unseen world. The order of the room settles as bodies shift into place, each retainer lying in strict formation, but silence does not bring calm. For the samurai, night was never free of danger, and the threats were not always human. Spirits, curses, and the restless dead were just as real in the imagination as assassins with blades. Bedtime became not just a matter of wax, hunger, or smoke, but of unseen enemies stalking the darkness. To guard against them, warriors relied on charms, prayers, and rituals that turned the bedroom into a shrine of restless superstition. Buddhist influence permeated these nightly practices. Sutras were written onto thin slips of paper, folded carefully and tucked under pillows to ward off evil spirits. Some were burned in small offerings before sleep, filling the room with smoke even thicker than the candle haze. These charms were believed to repel ghosts, demons, and curses sent by rival clans. The idea that paper with sacred words could stop a vengeful spirit from gnawing at your dreams may sound strange, but for a warrior who already feared assassins, it was simply another layer of defense. To you, it feels like lying down in a fumigation tent, choking on wax and incense while clinging to the hope that a folded scrap of paper is stronger than death. The belief in spirits was not abstract. Japanese folklore is rich with tales of yurei, ghostly figures who haunted the living, often taking vengeance for dishonor or betrayal. Samurai, constantly dealing in violence and shifting loyalties, were prime candidates for being haunted. Killing on the battlefield was honorable, but betrayals, executions, or failed duty carried the risk of spiritual retribution. Night was when these fears surfaced. Dreams were thought to be a vulnerable state where spirits could attack, so bedtime prayers were whispered not for comfort, but for protection from the dead. Sleep was dangerous, because sleep meant letting go. Shinto practices blended into these rituals. Warriors placed talismans of natural origin, stones, wood carvings, or small charms tied with cord, around sleeping quarters. Some sprinkled salt, a common Shinto purifying agent, at the entrance of the room. Salt was believed to repel impurity and keep malevolent forces at bay. You can almost see the outline of white crystals scattered by the door, a fragile barrier against the supernatural, one that doubles as seasoning if you get desperate enough from fasting. The absurdity lies in how layered these protections became. A samurai could be lying in full armor, clutching a katana, surrounded by loyal retainers, yet still feel vulnerable without a paper charm beneath his pillow or a pinch of salt at the door. The most disciplined warriors, capable of enduring hunger and hardship, still whispered fears of ghosts like children afraid of the dark. Honor demanded they show no fear on the battlefield, but in the privacy of night, the terrors of the unseen were given voice. The Buddhist temple bells reinforced these beliefs. Their tolling at dawn and dusk reminded all of the impermanence of life, a concept central to both Zen and warrior culture. Yet impermanence was not comforting at night. It was terrifying. To meditate on death by candlelight while scratching lice from your scalp only heightened the sense that spirits lurked just beyond the paper walls. Warriors rehearsed acceptance of death during the day, but when the lights dimmed, acceptance turned into anxious ritual. Dreams themselves were treated with suspicion. A dream could be an omen, a message from ancestors, or a warning of betrayal. Samurai manuals encouraged warriors to reflect on dreams upon waking, treating them as signs of future fortune or disaster. A nightmare was not dismissed as imagination. It was taken as a spiritual attack or prophecy. This meant the very act of sleeping was fraught with meaning, a nightly gamble where rest could bring either renewal or forewarning. Your restless twisting on the mat could easily be blamed on ghosts tugging at your soul, rather than the straw digging into your ribs. There are even accounts of warriors consulting on myoji, practitioners of divination and geomancy, to arrange their sleeping quarters according to spiritual alignment. The direction of the head, the flow of energy through the room, the placement of charms, all were believed to affect safety at night. Facing north could invite misfortune. Facing east could align you with favourable energies. To modern ears, it sounds like a mix of astrology and interior design, but to the samurai, it was life or death. Sleeping in the wrong direction was tempting fate, and fate was not something a warrior wanted to provoke. These layers of ritual reveal how fragile even the most disciplined warrior could feel when the lights went out. The battlefield demanded stoicism, but the bedroom invited vulnerability. Insects crawled, hunger gnawed, wax dripped, and in the silence of night, the mind filled with ghosts. The rituals of charms and prayers did not erase this fear. They only managed it, turning rest into a nightly negotiation with the unseen world. You lie there now, a folded slip of paper pressed under your cheek, salt scattered by the door, a blade by your side, the air thick with smoke and incense. Your eyes close, but your mind does not quiet. Every creak of wood could be an intruder, every shadow a spirit, every dream a warning. The samurai may have controlled his waking hours with discipline, but his nights were ruled by superstition. Sleep was never simply rest. It was a battlefield of its own, with enemies both visible and invisible. And as the candle sputters, sending the last curl of smoke into the air, you realize that even this was not the end of the nightly ordeal. The body itself posed its own challenges, from cramps and sores to the toll of constant training, leaving warriors twisting on their mats in physical misery long before dawn. Your charms are tucked under the pillow, your blade rests by your side, but none of it keeps your body from rebelling. For a samurai, the greatest enemy at night was often not an assassin or a ghost, but the simple weight of constant physical pain. The discipline demanded by warrior life carved the body into a tool of battle, but every tool wears down. When the candles dimmed, the ache surfaced, and the bed became less a place of rest than a nightly reminder of strain, injury, and exhaustion. Daily training was brutal. Samurai practiced kenjutsu, archery, horsemanship, and grappling from childhood. Hours spent in armor built strength but left joints swollen and backs stiff. The straw mats beneath you offered little relief, their firmness pressing into bones already bruised from sparring and drills. Muscles knotted, knees cracked, and shoulders burned with the familiar ache of overuse. There were no soft mattresses or ergonomic pillows to ease the pain. You fell asleep as if collapsing on a battlefield, your body carrying the imprint of every swing, every march, every bowstring drawn. Injuries piled up. Cuts, bruises, and sprains were common, and without modern medicine, many never healed properly. A strained tendon became a lifelong limp. A broken finger healed crooked. A sword cut left scar tissue that ached with the cold. Warriors fought through these wounds in daylight, but in the silence of night, the pain returned with sharp insistence. Lying still only made it worse, as stiff joints locked and cramped. You shift, trying to find a position that eases the pain, but every movement wakes another complaint from your battered frame. The medical treatments available were as harsh as the training itself. Pain was treated with herbal poultices, moxibustion, and acupuncture. Some of these offered relief, but others were more ritual than cure. Acupuncture needles were driven into tender muscles, leaving soreness that lingered into the night. Moxibustion, the burning of dried mugwort on the skin, could blister the flesh while supposedly restoring energy flow. These remedies reflected a belief in balancing the body rather than fixing it, which meant the samurai often went to bed not healed but seared, punctured, and smelling faintly of smoke and herbs. Armour contributed its own toll. Hours of carrying weight across the shoulders compressed the spine, left grooves in the skin, and caused long-term damage to posture. Helmets rubbed against scalps already irritated with wax, leaving raw patches and tension headaches. The hands of warriors thickened with calluses from weapon grips, fingers often swollen from repeated strikes. By the time the day ended, the body was a catalogue of small injuries, each demanding attention the moment stillness set in. Bedtime became a cataloguing of discomfort, one ache rising as another subsided, a symphony of complaints from every joint and tendon. The culture surrounding these pains made them worse. To complain was dishonourable, to show weakness shameful. Samurai endured quietly, internalizing discomfort as part of their duty. Pain became a form of training in itself, another reminder that the body was not their own but property of discipline and service. This meant that rather than seeking comfort, warriors often denied themselves it, lying stiff on mats as though proving loyalty to suffering. What modern people might treat with medicine or rest was reframed as virtue. To endure without complaint was the true mark of readiness. Fatigue compounded the problem. Campaigns demanded long marches with little rest, soldiers often travelling miles in armour across rugged terrain. Food scarcity weakened the body further, making recovery slower. Nights in field camps meant sleeping on cold ground or damp earth, sometimes with nothing more than a cloak for cover. The mats and futon of the home felt luxurious in comparison, though they too carried their own miseries. Exhaustion made warriors collapse quickly, but the quality of sleep was shallow, broken by cramps, hunger pangs, or the sound of shifting guards outside. One overlooked aspect was how these aches accumulated over years. Samurai were not ageless warriors. Many fought into their 40s or 50s, their bodies carrying decades of abuse. Arthritis, chronic back pain, and hearing loss from constant gunfire in later periods plagued older warriors. These men still clung to the nightly rituals, still lay rigid with weapons at their side, but their bodies no longer obeyed as swiftly. Sleep was lighter, shorter, and filled with pain. What was celebrated as eternal vigilance was often just age and discomfort refusing to let them rest. The absurdity of it lies in the contrast. Samurai culture painted itself in ideals of control, discipline, and mastery over the body. Yet every night, that same body betrayed the image, twitching with cramps, stiffening with arthritis, and throbbing with injury. The battlefield scars that once won honour turned into nightly torment, gnawing away at whatever shallow rest could be found. Beneath the armour and discipline was simply a human frame, one that broke down under the weight of endless strain. You turn again on the mat, but your knees pop loudly, your back protests, and your shoulder flares with pain from old bruises. The candle smoulders, smoke hanging low, and the silence of the room only amplifies the rhythm of discomfort pulsing through your bones. This is the reality of warrior rest, not serene meditation, but the stubborn endurance of a body trained to the point of collapse. And as you lie awake, skin itching, muscles aching, stomach growling, and scalp burning under a crust of wax, you realise that the samurai ideal of discipline was not carved in armour or written in oaths. It was written every night into their flesh, one sleepless hour at a time. Yet physical pain was not the only nightly torment. The environment outside the walls added its own chorus, with animals, insects, and the very seasons conspiring to rob samurai of rest. Nature itself became an enemy once the candles went out. The room is suffocating, your joints are throbbing, and the wax has glued half your hair to the mat, but the world outside is no kinder. Samurai homes were thin shells of wood and paper, vulnerable not only to enemies but to the constant intrusions of nature. The night was alive with animals, insects, and weather that conspired to keep you restless. When the walls are made of sliding screens and the roof is little more than thatch or tile, you do not live indoors so much as negotiate with the outdoors. Sleep became a fragile truce with the natural world, one that the world rarely respected. Insects were the most relentless adversary. Japan's humid summers brought swarms of mosquitoes, their high-pitched whine at your ear making rest impossible. Without glass windows or proper screens, houses were open invitations to biting pests. Fires were sometimes lit to create smoke as repellent, but this only filled the room with choking haze. The choice was simple: breathe soot or bleed for mosquitoes. Fleas thrived in tatami mats, burrowing into straw cores, multiplying in numbers too vast to control. Samurai scratched through the night, their skin crawling as if the mat itself had turned against them. Even lice were not content to remain on scalps and clothing, often spreading onto mats and bedding. The body was a banquet, and sleep was when the feast began. Rodents added their own chaos. Mice and rats were drawn to the food scraps that inevitably found their way into houses, gnawing at wooden beams and scratching through the night. Their droppings littered floors, their squeaks echoed in the dark, and occasionally one would dart across a sleeping body. For warriors who faced arrows and blades without flinching, the indignity of a rat crawling over their face in the night was a torment they could not train away. Cats were kept to control the rodents, but cats themselves became nocturnal nuisances, yowling, fighting, and leaping unpredictably onto bedding. The larger animals were less constant, but no less threatening. Wild dogs roamed towns, howling at night, sometimes breaking into compounds in search of scraps. Wolves prowled the countryside, their calls audible through paper walls, a reminder that the world beyond remained untamed. Horses, essential to samurai life, often shared close quarters with their masters during campaigns, bringing their own noise and smell into sleeping areas. The bond between warrior and horse was real, but so was the stench of manure wafting into rooms where men tried to rest. Weather compounded the misery. In summer, humidity clung to every surface, turning bedding into damp sponges and making mats reek of mildew. Sweat pooled and refused to evaporate, leaving warriors sticky and restless. In winter, the cold seeped through walls and floors, leaving blankets stiff with frost by morning. Fires were dangerous in wooden houses, so many endured bitter cold without relief. Frostbite was not uncommon in northern provinces, where warriors sometimes slept with straw packed around their feet just to keep toes intact. Rain added its own punishment, leaking through roofs, dripping steadily onto mats, or pooling on floors where bare feet sank into cold water upon waking. Earthquakes, a constant feature of Japan, occasionally turned nights into chaos. A tremor could shake a house apart in seconds, collapsing walls, scattering mats, and sending families fleeing into the dark. For samurai, who already slept half awake with weapons ready, the added threat of the ground itself shifting under them meant that no night was truly safe. Even nature seemed to conspire to rob them of rest. Seasonal pests followed their own rhythms. Summer brought mosquitoes and flies. Autumn filled the air with mold spores from damp straw. Winter carried the coughs and fevers of cramped households. And spring returned swarms of insects with renewed vigour. Each season carried its own nightly challenge, and no amount of discipline could change the fact that a paper wall was no barrier against the persistence of the natural world. The absurdity lies in the contrast between image and reality. Samurai are remembered for their elegance, their polished armour and neat gardens, their reputation for discipline. Yet at night they swatted at mosquitoes, scratched at flea bites, and shivered under quilts that smelled of mildew. Their noble homes were little more than ornate screens unable to keep out the buzzing, scratching, dripping and howling of the outside world. Every night was a reminder that nature did not bow to rank or sword. The psychological toll was just as heavy. The endless whine of insects, the scratching of rodents, the drip of rain, the howl of dogs, all combined into a chorus of irritations that kept warriors restless. For men expected to rise at dawn and train with weapons, the lack of quiet rest was debilitating. Yet admitting to fatigue was weakness, so the struggle continued in silence. A warrior might be celebrated for endurance on the battlefield, but much of his endurance was proven in the bedroom, against the buzzing persistence of a single mosquito. You lie there now, the mat damp beneath you, a mosquito whining near your ear, the scratch of a rat in the corner, and the faint drip of water through the roof striking your blanket. The candle flickers, filling the room with more smoke, and you realise that rest here is less an escape and more a gauntlet. The night does not care that you are a samurai. It treats you no differently than it treats the farmer in the next village or the thief in the alley. You're simply another body lying in straw, waiting to be gnawed, bitten, chilled or drenched. And as you curl tighter under your blanket, trying to escape the drip, the bite and the howl, you recognise that bedtime was not only a battle against hunger, wax and rank, but against the very environment itself. Nature did not pause when the candles dimmed. It came inside, uninvited, every night. Yet even beyond insects and weather, another layer of discomfort awaited. The very rules of etiquette surrounding how a samurai lay down to sleep were rigid, dictating posture, direction, and form, turning rest into another performance of discipline. The mat is damp, the mosquitoes relentless, but your suffering is not only about insects and smoke, it is also about how you are allowed to lie down. For a samurai, even posture was governed by etiquette, rules so strict that the simple act of closing your eyes could be judged as loyal, dishonourable, or dangerously careless. Bedtime was never free from scrutiny. The body had to remain disciplined, not just on the battlefield or in the Lord's Hall, but in the most private moment of rest. The traditional sleeping position was on the back, arms folded, feet together, the body arranged with careful order. Rolling over onto your side or sprawling face down as modern sleepers often do, was frowned upon. Such posture suggested vulnerability, even laziness. To lie face down exposed your back to attack. To curl on your side appeared childish. The proper warrior lay straight and still, as though even in slumber he was ready to rise in an instant. The bed became a drill ground, and posture a rehearsal for vigilance. Direction mattered too. Manuals on etiquette warned against sleeping with the head pointed north, as this mirrored the position of corpses laid out for funerals. To align yourself with the dead was seen as courting misfortune. Some avoided sleeping toward the west as well, believing it invited the pure land of Amida Buddha and might tempt the soul to drift away before its time. That left east and south, which were considered more auspicious. Your very pillow had to be turned according to cosmic geography, as though the universe itself might take offense if you lay the wrong way. Imagine adjusting your body every night so the stars approved of your rest. For samurai in service, posture carried another layer of meaning. To sleep facing away from your lord was unthinkable. In communal quarters, retainers oriented their bodies toward the center, aligning their posture with hierarchy. Where your feet pointed became a marker of loyalty. Even in unconsciousness, your body had to broadcast submission. Lying the wrong way could be seen as a slight, a silent insult made visible through geometry. The absurdity is that posture was not just symbolic, it was expected to be physically maintained. Samurai were trained to remain still through the night, avoiding restless shifting that could disturb others or appear undisciplined. The rigid top-knot pillows encouraged this, making movement uncomfortable. Stillness became virtue, as though to toss and turn were signs of weakness. Yet stillness meant cramps, numb limbs, and the inevitable pins and needles of circulation cut off by stiff poses. You wake with arms tingling, back aching, and legs frozen, all because your honor demanded that you sleep like a statue. The influence of Zen Buddhism reinforced this obsession with posture. Meditation demanded straight backs, controlled breathing, and stillness of body. Sleep, though not identical, borrowed from the same ideals. To rest sprawled or crooked was indulgent. To rest with order was discipline. The line between spiritual practice and nightly misery blurred. You were not just lying down, you were staging a quiet performance for the universe, your bones arranged in harmony with ritual. The consequences of poor posture were not trivial. A samurai who fell asleep sloppily in communal quarters risked ridicule, or worse, suspicion. If you shifted noisily, rolled too close to another, or snored excessively, you marked yourself as lacking discipline. In a culture where reputation was everything, even your unconscious body could betray you. The anxiety of this expectation only made rest harder. You lie stiff, aware that your neighbour is listening for weakness, that your position itself is under silent inspection. During military campaigns, posture became practical as well as symbolic. Soldiers in field camps were often instructed to sleep in positions that allowed for rapid rise. Weapons were placed at the ready, armour laid beside the mat, and bodies aligned toward the direction of potential attack. Rest was reduced to a rehearsal for ambush, with posture designed for efficiency of violence. In some cases, warriors were instructed to sleep in shifts, lying in rows so that half remained lightly awake while the others drifted. Night itself became a formation, bodies arranged as though part of a silent army even in slumber. All of this created an environment where the body was never fully allowed to relax. Muscles remained tense, spines rigid, limbs carefully placed. Even when exhaustion finally claimed you, the mat beneath felt less like a bed and more like a stage where every angle mattered. Samurai might have fought duels with blades by day, but by night they fought duels with their own posture, trapped in rigid geometry enforced by superstition and etiquette. You can feel it now, the burn in your shoulders from lying flat too long, the tingling in your arm as circulation fades, the cramp in your calf from remaining still. The candle sputters, shadows flicker across the paper walls, and you realize your body is not resting. It is performing, silently proving loyalty, endurance, and discipline through every unmoving limb. Sleep was not an escape from duty. It was duty extended into unconsciousness. And as your eyelids finally close, your neck stiff, your limbs buzzing with numbness, you know that even in dreams you're not free. You have become a diagram of rank, a compass aligned to superstition, a statue rehearsing vigilance. Bedtime was not peace. It was etiquette written into flesh. But posture was only one layer of this nightly ordeal. The rituals of waking that followed were just as relentless, for dawn came with its own rigid routines that left warriors staggering into the new day, already worn thin from the night before. The candle has barely sputtered out when the first sound of morning arrives, and it is not gentle. Samurai did not wake to birdsong or soft chimes. They woke to bells, drums, or the barked orders of superiors, reminders that rest was not a right but a brief intermission. Temples rang their bells at dawn, their deep tones shaking the air, while military households often used wooden clappers or shouted commands. Either way, waking was abrupt and merciless. You open your eyes to a world still thick with smoke and insects, body sore, head heavy, only to be dragged back into discipline before your mind has even adjusted to consciousness. Morning routines were as strict as bedtime rituals, if not harsher. Warriors were expected to rise immediately, without the luxury of stretching or lingering. To stay in bed was dishonor, a sign of weakness. The phrase, "asleep while the enemy moves," was a condemnation, used to shame those who hesitated at dawn. A true samurai sprang from the mat like an arrow loosed from a bow, even if the body screamed for another hour of rest. Sleep inertia was not tolerated. One of the most punishing aspects was purification. Water rituals were central to Japanese culture, and warriors were expected to cleanse themselves at the start of the day. In summer, this meant dousing yourself in cold water that carried relief from the heat, but still shocked the body. In winter, it was outright torture. Buckets of icy water were poured over heads, or men plunged into rivers before dawn as acts of purification. The logic was spiritual as much as physical. Cold cleansed not only sweat but impurity, bracing the mind and body for discipline. To you, it feels like punishment disguised as devotion. Your sore body shivers violently, breath catching as frigid water turns the morning into another ordeal. The absurdity is that this ritual was not optional. Warriors who refused to wash risked ridicule, their hygiene judged as a lack of discipline. This was ironic, considering that hair wax, lice, and unwashed bedding still clung to their nights. Yet the splash of cold water was elevated as proof of readiness. The body may still itch, ache, and stink of oil, but the shock of purification was treated as spiritual armor. Meals did not provide relief either. Breakfast was small, often little more than rice gruel, pickled vegetables, or miso soup. Protein was scarce, luxury foods rarer still. A warrior rising from a night of hunger and pain found little satisfaction in a thin bowl of porridge. Yet restraint was the expectation. To eat heavily in the morning was seen as indulgence, as though it dulled the spirit before training. So the cycle continued. Fasting at night, a meagre meal at dawn, and hours of exertion demanded immediately afterward. The body staggered from deprivation to discipline without pause. Drills followed swiftly. Training began early, with sword practice, archery or mounted exercises filling the hours after sunrise. A samurai's morning was not leisurely. It was designed to remind him that life was never separate from battle. For those stationed in castles or garrisons, inspections followed. Armour had to be maintained, weapons checked, discipline enforced through ritual displays of readiness. Any sign of sluggishness could draw punishment. Sleep was never enough to erase fatigue, but fatigue itself was treated as weakness. You marched, swung, and drilled as though the night's miseries had not occurred, body trembling under the weight of endless expectation. In some households, mornings included meditation or recitation of texts, particularly under Zen influence. This was framed as a practice of calm and focus, yet for the exhausted warrior, it became another demand. Sitting in silence, spine rigid, breathing steady, the samurai was expected to discipline his mind as he had disciplined his body. To fall asleep during meditation was unthinkable, a disgrace that revealed lack of self-control. Imagine being told to sit motionless and serene while your body screamed for more sleep. It was less enlightenment and more a struggle not to collapse. The absurd logic of these routines was simple. By turning mornings into trials, samurai culture ensured that warriors lived in constant endurance. The body was denied ease at night and denied recovery at dawn, conditioned into perpetual vigilance. This was praised as strength, yet in reality it was slow erosion, grinding men down under the weight of endless discipline. Every day began already half broken, the remnants of sleepless nights carried into drills and marches. You can feel it now, the sting of cold water dripping down your back, the emptiness of a bowl of rice gruel doing nothing for your hunger, the ache of muscles forced into sword practice before they had time to recover. The sun rises, but relief does not. Morning is simply another layer of the same ordeal, proof that sleep was never meant to restore, only to reset the cycle of suffering. And as the bell echoes again through the compound, signalling more drills, more discipline, you recognize that the horrors of bedtime were never contained to night. They bled into every hour, shaping lives not around comfort but around constant readiness. Yet mornings were only one half of the cycle. The nights themselves were shaped by preparation for the next day, with elaborate evening rituals of grooming, prayers, and weapons maintenance that dragged bedtime even further from peace. The day's training is over, the drills are finished, the last orders have been shouted, but you're still not allowed to collapse. Bedtime in a samurai household was not a gentle winding down, but a checklist of duties that stretched long past exhaustion. Before the mat and the candle awaited, there was work to be done, and that work turned the end of the day into yet another drill. Weapons came first. A sword was more than a tool. It was the soul of the warrior, and no blade was permitted to lie idle without care. Every evening warriors inspected their katana and wakizashi, wiping down the blades with oil to prevent rust. Silk cloths, powders, and oils were applied in careful ritual, each stroke deliberate, each motion a rehearsal of reverence. To neglect this task was unthinkable, for a dull or rusted blade was dishonour made visible. So instead of resting, you sat cross-legged under flickering candlelight, polishing steel while your muscles trembled with fatigue. The very weapon that had weighed on your hip all day now weighed on your mind, demanding worship before you could sleep. Armour followed. Lacquered plates, leather straps and iron fittings collected dust, sweat and blood during daily drills. These had to be inspected, aired and maintained. A cracked strap could mean death in battle, so attention was constant. Men unfastened cords, adjusted bindings, and hung armour pieces to dry. The smell of sweat and wax mixed with the acrid tang of lacquer, filling the room until it seemed that the air itself had been boiled in discipline. To collapse without checking your armour was to gamble with your life. Grooming was its own ordeal. Hair wax had to be reapplied, not removed, for the knot was meant to remain stiff even through the night. Combs dragged through oily strands, scraping the scalp already raw from helmets and insects. Beards were trimmed, nails cut, teeth rubbed with rough powders of salt or charcoal. Cleanliness was not comfort, but another mark of control. You prepared yourself for sleep as though preparing to meet an audience, every detail tied to honour. Yet the reality was filthier. Combs pulled out lice with hair, wax clumped in knots, and nails blackened from soil never truly came clean. Prayer and superstition lengthened the ritual further. Buddhist chants were whispered in dim rooms, sutras placed at bedposts, salt sprinkled at thresholds. Some burned incense, filling air already thick with wax smoke and oil fumes until it choked the lungs. The idea was purification, to cleanse the space before vulnerability. In truth, it only made the night heavier, layering suffocation onto exhaustion. Still, no warrior dared skip the ritual. If a rival spirit appeared in dreams, the blame would fall not on fate but on negligence. Households followed patterns of inspection as well. Higher-ranked warriors walked among retainers, checking weapons, ensuring order, enforcing silence. Rooms were tidied, bedding arranged, mats aligned. The smallest detail another mark of obedience. Even the way blankets were folded reflected discipline. Disorder was shameful, a crack in the illusion of control. So before you could lie down, you first had to prove that your space embodied loyalty and order. Meals were timed with these routines. Supper, if it was offered, came early, often hours before rest. This meant that by the time candles were being trimmed and weapons polished, hunger had already returned. The body ached for rest and food, but instead it received ritual after ritual, each step dragging the night further into duty. What should have been relief became a slow procession of tasks, carried out under smoke and silence. The absurdity of this lies in the rhythm. Samurai were trained from dawn to dusk in combat, but the day never truly ended. The sword had to be polished, the armour checked, the hair waxed, the sutras whispered, the mats arranged. Bedtime was not release. It was simply another formation, another battlefield of discipline disguised as routine. You did not sleep because you were free to. You slept because you had completed the required drills of fatigue. Even the atmosphere reflected this endless cycle. The house grew quiet, not from rest but from enforced silence. Retainers lay stiff on mats, weapons polished and placed by their sides, bodies aligned in formation. The air was heavy with the smell of oil and incense, shadows stretching across paper walls. Sleep arrived not as relief, but as submission. The final order of the day obeyed only after every ritual had been completed. You can feel it now. Your fingers sore from polishing steel, your scalp burning from wax, your lungs stinging from smoke, your stomach growling, your eyes heavy yet unable to close until every rule has been followed. The candle burns low, the charms are set, the blade gleams by your side, and only then are you permitted to lower yourself onto the mat. This is not rest. This is discipline carried into the deepest hours, discipline masquerading as ritual, ritual masquerading as sleep. And as you lie there, body heavy, lungs filled with the stench of oil and smoke, your sword polished but your spirit still restless, you realize that the night has not given you peace. It has only given you another round of duty. Yet even as the rituals ended, another danger lurked. Fires, accidents, and the fragility of wooden homes meant that the samurai's sleep could be shattered at any moment by catastrophe. The same candle that guided your rituals could just as easily turn your room into a furnace before dawn. The candle gutters beside your head, its tiny flame the only light left in the room. It flickers against paper walls, casting thin silhouettes that tremble like ghosts, and you realize the flame itself is a greater danger than anything waiting outside. Samurai homes were beautiful to look at, but beauty came with a price. Constructed almost entirely of wood, bamboo and washi paper, they were tinder boxes waiting for a single spark. To sleep in one was to gamble that the fire you relied on for light would not turn into the disaster that consumed you. Fires were not rare accidents, they were constant. Japanese cities and towns of the medieval and early modern periods were plagued by catastrophic blazes. Kyoto, Edo and Osaka saw entire districts vanish overnight, their wooden structures feeding flames like dry kindling. Edo was so prone to fires it earned the grim nickname the City of Fires. Even castles, with their imposing walls, were not immune. One stray ember in a garrison could reduce barracks to ash. To sleep with a candle burning was an act of faith, and to sleep without one was to invite paranoia of intruders. There was no safe choice. Oil lamps only worsened the risk. Fueled by fish oil or vegetable oil, they smoked heavily, coated walls with soot and tipped over easily. A single bump from a restless retainer or a startled animal could spill burning oil across mats and blankets. Tatami mats stuffed with straw ignited quickly, the flames racing across the floor before anyone could react. Paper walls caught fire in seconds, collapsing as glowing ash. Within minutes, a home could become a furnace. You lie under your blanket, listening to the faint crackle of the candle, and wonder whether your bedding will be the next torch. Fire shaped city planning itself. Houses were built with gaps between them in hopes of slowing flames, but density often made this useless. Entire neighbourhoods were designed with fire breaks, yet winds carried sparks far beyond. Samurai households, clustered near lords' castles, often served as both homes and barracks. If one went up in flames, the blaze spread quickly through the compound. A warrior might go to bed with polished sword and waxed hair, only to wake surrounded by walls collapsing in smoke. The irony is that warriors themselves sometimes contributed to the risk. Smoking pipes by candlelight, carrying open flames into storage rooms, or using fire to repel mosquitoes all increased the chance of disaster. Even rituals of incense burning, meant to purify the room, added fuel to catastrophe. Every act of devotion or discipline was also a roll of the dice. What was framed as ritual could just as easily become ruin. Records describe entire garrisons destroyed by fire during the Sengoku period, soldiers fleeing into the night with nothing but their armour and blades. Daimyo kept firewatch patrols, men tasked with scanning for sparks or embers through the night. Yet even with vigilance, prevention was fragile. The materials of Japanese architecture were simply too flammable, too unforgiving. Warriors might train for years to fend off assassins, only to perish because someone's candle toppled onto a quilt. The psychological toll was immense. To live in such fragile homes meant carrying fear of fire into every night. The creak of beams, the pop of embers, even the shifting of the wind could rouse a warrior from shallow sleep. Families rehearsed escape routes. Retainers were ordered to be ready at the first shout, and valuables were kept in boxes that could be carried quickly. Yet no plan guaranteed survival. Fire moved faster than loyalty. Entire households could vanish before dawn, their ashes scattering into the same air that warriors had breathed through smoky nights. The absurdity here is how normalized it became. Fires were so frequent in Edo that rebuilding was practically ritual, neighborhoods learning to treat disaster as routine. For samurai, this meant that even destruction was absorbed into duty. A warrior who lost his home in flames was expected to rebuild without complaint, treating catastrophe as another test of resilience. To fear fire openly was weakness, but to endure its aftermath silently was honor. The health consequences of constant smoke exposure added another layer. Candles, lamps, and incense filled homes with fumes, and even without catastrophic fire, lungs carried the burden. Chronic coughs, eye irritation, and respiratory illness were common. Sleeping in smoke meant waking hoarse, eyes watering, throats raw. Samurai might have hardened their bodies through training, but their lungs were slowly weakened by nightly inhalation. A warrior could sprint into battle but wheeze after years of smoky nights. You lie awake now, the flame flickering dangerously near the paper wall, the smell of oil clinging to the air. Your sword rests by your side, polished and ready, but no blade can cut smoke, no katana can defend against fire racing across mats. The very structure you trust to shelter you is your greatest vulnerability. Every breath carries the risk of being your last before flame consumes the walls. And as the candle burns lower, wax pooling, shadows flickering, you realize that rest in these homes was not simply uneasy. It was precarious, the illusion of safety balanced against the constant risk of destruction. Night was not only haunted by insects, hunger, and ghosts, but by the knowledge that one spark could erase everything. Yet fire was only one of the disasters that shaped samurai nights. Earthquakes, storms, and floods turned rest into an even broader gamble, proving that the natural world had as much power to unmake their lives as any rival clan. The candle flickers lower, but you cannot relax. Even if the flame spares you, the earth itself might not. Japan's geography has always made sleep fragile. Mountains rumble, rivers rise, and winds tear through wooden walls with little warning. To be a samurai meant not only fearing assassins and fire, but also bracing for nature's indifference. Bedtime was never free from catastrophe, because the world outside could overturn your life before dawn. Earthquakes were the most constant reminder of this fragility. Japan sits along some of the most active fault lines on Earth, and tremors were a fact of life long before modern seismology gave them names and scales. Houses of wood and paper swayed with the ground, their lightness offering some protection against collapse, but still leaving walls buckling and beams cracking. Tatami mats shifted beneath your body, sliding like ships on waves, while lanterns toppled and walls split. A quake could strike in the deep hours of night, shaking warriors awake and sending them stumbling into the dark with swords in hand, as if steel could fight the ground itself. Historical records describe devastating quakes that flattened castle towns and swallowed entire villages. The Great Quake of 1586 destroyed fortifications across central Japan, while others sent tidal waves crashing into coastal settlements. For a samurai, whose identity rested on control and discipline, there was no dignity in these moments. The ground did not care for rank. Lords and peasants alike crawled from wreckage, soot-covered and disoriented. You can imagine the absurdity of it. Warriors trained to strike with precision reduced to staggering barefoot through rubble, their armour useless against earth and sea. Floods brought their own punishment. Japan's climate made rivers both lifelines and hazards. Heavy rains swelled waterways, washing through towns, turning streets into currents that carried away belongings, livestock, and sometimes sleeping families. Samurai homes, raised slightly above ground on stilts, offered limited protection. Tatami mats soaked quickly, bedding grew waterlogged, and nights were spent shivering in dampness. In castle towns, moats swelled and overflowed, drowning the very defences meant to protect warriors. The sound of rushing water in the night was not soothing. It was a reminder that your mat might soon float away. Storms completed the trinity of nightly dangers. Typhoons ripped through Japan every summer and autumn, their winds tearing roofs from houses, their rain flooding compounds. Paper walls stood no chance. A gust could rip an entire panel from its frame, leaving warriors exposed to the elements in the middle of the night. Lightning set buildings ablaze, combining storm and fire into a double disaster. Even stone castles were not immune. Roof tiles flew loose, towers shook, and retainers scrambled to secure gates in winds that bent trees. Sleep during storm season was little more than lying awake waiting for beams to snap. The absurdity is that all of this was treated as routine. Natural disaster was woven into daily life, endured with the same stoicism as hunger or lice. Samurai were expected to rise from rubble or flood without complaint, framing survival as a continuation of duty. Manuals even advised warriors on how to react during calamity. Protect the lord first, save weapons if possible, then attend to family. You were not just enduring the quake or storm as a human. You were enduring it as a soldier, bound to loyalty even as the roof collapsed on your head. The toll on health was heavy. Constant dampness from floods and rains bred mould in mats and quilts, worsening respiratory illnesses already fueled by smoke. Injuries from falling beams or slipping in floods compounded aches from training. Nights spent in shivering fear only deepened exhaustion. Yet complaining was shameful, so the damage was hidden under ritual. You rose each morning as though nothing had happened, despite the fact that the mat beneath you was still damp with rain, or shifted askew by tremors. Psychologically, it eroded the illusion of safety. Samurai who trained daily to maintain control were reminded every night that the natural world was beyond mastery. The candle could burn the house, the ground could swallow the house, and the river could carry the house away. You might prepare for assassins and ghosts, but none of it mattered when the mountain itself shook. For a warrior whose pride rested on vigilance, to admit helplessness against nature was unthinkable. So disaster was reframed as another form of training, endurance rebranded as discipline. In reality, it was fear disguised as virtue. You lie awake, the mat vibrating under you, the walls shuddering with each gust, rain dripping steadily through the roof, water soaking the straw beneath your blanket. The candle flickers out, not by choice but by draft, leaving only the sound of rushing wind and rattling beams. Your sword is polished, your hair is waxed, your posture rigid, but none of it protects you now. The earth shifts again, subtle but unmistakable, and you know that rest is not coming. Night has made you vulnerable and nature is not merciful. And as the storm continues, thunder rolling, water seeping, beams creaking, you understand that samurai life was not only haunted by discipline and duty, but also by the fragility of the world itself. The enemies they feared most were not always other men. They were the elements, indifferent and inescapable, turning every night into a test of endurance against the planet itself. If you enjoyed listening to warriors trying to sleep through earthquakes, floods, lice, and all the other bedtime horrors of history, let me know in the comments which story you'd like me to dive into next. Your suggestions are basically the fuel that keeps me digging up more ways humans have suffered creatively through the centuries. And if you had fun drifting off to this misery, make sure to check out my other videos. Plenty more historical suffering waiting to tuck you in.